to power the cooling system, water quickly boiled off, and to prevent an explosion like what happened at Chernobyl, the utility intentionally vented steam contaminated with iodine-131 and cesium-137. Every day seemed to bring new complications, explosions, fires, and further intentional ventings. During the first week after the earthquake, the International Atomic Energy Agency and the French Institute for Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety both found radiation levels around the plant of 1930 sieverts per hour. We were talking about millisieverts. And so this is over 6,000 times normal background radiation. And which isotopes contaminated the land and the air and the sea? Lots of isotopes. Plutonium-238, a strong alpha emitter. Various isotopes of strontium, a beta emitter, which was found as far as 79 kilometers, or a little under 50 miles from the plant. Iodine-131, a beta and gamma emitter, which made its way into drinking water, vegetables, cow's milk, and human milk. And cesium-137, which accumulates in the bladder from where it can irradiate the pelvis with beta particles and indirectly with gamma rays. Cesium was found in plants, in firewood, in rice, and in drinking water. Radioactivity found its way into supermarkets, in rice, in beef from cattle fed contaminated straw, and in one incident you may have heard of, in green tea that made its way to France. Half of Japan's seafood comes from the stretch of coast near Fukushima, and we know that according to the Japanese Atomic Industrial Forum, levels of iodine-131 in the sea near reactor number 2 were 7.5 million times the so-called safety limit right after the accident. And 4 months later, we're still 10,000 times baseline. You may think that accidents like this aren't likely to happen at our plants. But over the course of 32 years, these 3 major accidents and countless minor accidents did happen. And if it comforts you to think that at least here in the Northeast, we don't have to worry about earthquakes, keep in mind that the Boston quake of 1755 is thought to have exceeded a magnitude of 6. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has said that Indian Point, 24.5 miles from here on the Hudson, is the most vulnerable plant because its construction did not take into account the earthquakes to which it might be exposed. It is right at the intersection of 2 important fault lines, the Ramapo Fault, and guess what? The Stamford-Peekskill Line. It was built to withstand a magnitude 6 quake. Scientists now say we should expect a magnitude 7 quake at Indian Point. And earthquakes and accidents are not the only problem. To give you an idea of scale, a large medical center comprising several hospitals and many labs using radioactive isotopes and diagnostic tests might have a total inventory of 2 curies of radioactive isotopes. An average nuclear power plant has 16 billion curies. We just aren't smart enough to keep that quantity of material secure. A typical reactor may take in 20,000 gallons of water per minute. That's why these plants are always by the shore or by a major river or lake. 3/4 of the water is released as steam, and the remaining 5,000 gallons gets returned to the body of water. A nuclear power plant has many miles of pipes, and pipes leak. And as plants age, old pipes especially leak. Even without leaks, so-called permissible levels of radioactive elements leave the plant with those thousands of gallons of water. And you will recall that there has never been shown to be a safe level of radiation, so we conclude that permissible levels are not safe levels. And radioactive fission gases are also intentionally released in so-called permissible levels. The risk of childhood leukemia is doubled within 3 miles of a nuclear power plant, and the risk of other childhood cancers is also significantly increased, according to a German study. And I think it was this paper that talks about several other studies, including France and the US, that show the same thing. Of course, most children in those communities don't get leukemia. Most children don't get cancer. We are talking about low baseline levels, and we increase those levels by 60% for all childhood cancers, or if we increase the levels by over 100% for childhood leukemia, we are still talking about small numbers of children. And their cancers don't have a label attributing the disease to the nearby power plant. There's a fundamental principle in medicine When there is a condition for which we have no cure, we must make every effort to prevent that condition. We have no cure for a problem like Fukushima. We have no cure for a day in and day out problem like Indian Point. That is why we must work to shut down the entire nuclear power industry and replace it not with something comparably dangerous like coal, but with something positively friendly like power from the sun. Thank you.
Okay, so our next speaker is Alice Slater, and she will be speaking on the linkages between nuclear power and nuclear weapons.
First, got to do the linkages between the mic and me. Wait a minute.
Can I help you?
Wait, okay. No, I don't know. Okay. Well, we're here at an anti-war conference, and the drums of war are beating once again as we read of the preparations and rehearsals for U.S. or Israeli military strike against Iran to take out its nascent bomb-making capability, as Iran is asserting its legal right under the Non-Proliferation Treaty to enrich uranium from its nuclear reactors for, quote, peaceful nuclear power. As we watch the planned transformation of the Imperial U.S. military into a global strike force seeking full-spectrum dominance, its targeted assassination program, now in 8 countries, waged by the U.S. chair force, raining deadly drone attacks down on unwary terrorists and innocent civilians as well, without benefit of trial, evidence, charges. Even the Nazis got a trial at Nuremberg. The abhorrent willingness to wage illegal preemptive wars. We are reaping the grim whirlwind of these policies. Iran is relying on the Faustian bargain of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which enables it to develop what is ostensibly described as peaceful nuclear technology, which would give them the capacity and materials they need to build bombs of their own as a deterrent against U.S. threats. The Non-Proliferation Treaty, signed in 1970, contained a promise by 5 nuclear weapon states, the U.S., Russia, UK, France, and China, to give up their nuclear weapons if all the other countries of the world promise not to get them. And to sweeten the pot, we promise them an inalienable right to peaceful nuclear technology. I mean, just think of it, our Constitution, inalienable right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and nuclear power? Where did that come from?
It says among these.
Right, that's the other one, yeah. Only India, Pakistan, and Israel refused to sign, and they used the peaceful technology to develop nuclear weapons of their own. And North Korea, which had signed, pulled out of the treaty, took its peaceful technology, put it through the enrichment process, and made bombs. Now Iran has begun to legally enrich its uranium. They're allowed to enrich it up to a certain level for medical technology or as fuel in nuclear reactors. But it's very easy to just keep putting it through. That's what this whole fuss is about, you know, and it's because it's Iran. Nobody made a fuss about Israel and India and Pakistan, you know. Under the guise of peaceful nuclear power, other countries such as South Africa, Argentina, Brazil, and Libya were well on their way to developing nuclear bombs, which they later abandoned. And the former IEA director, Mohammed El-Baradei, said, "We just cannot do business as usual, that every country can build its own factories for separating plutonium or enriching uranium. Then we are really talking about 30, 40 countries sitting on the fence with a nuclear weapons capability that could be converted into a nuclear weapon in a matter of months." Fukushima was the greatest industrial catastrophe in the history of mankind. The massive tsunami crippled the cooling systems of the reactor complex with 3 exposed reactors and 4 fuel storage pools, all in desperate need of being cooled. As to this day, they continue to spew their poisons into the ground, air, and water in an unprecedented meltdown. Graver than the accident in Chernobyl, which involved only 1 nuclear reactor. But even without catastrophic meltdowns like Fukushima, Chernobyl, or 3 Mile Island, as we just heard, nuclear energy produces toxic environmental devastation at every step along the way in the nuclear fuel cycle, from the lethal radioactive legacy produced by mining uranium ore. I was out to Navajo country. I mean, they have terrible health, children born with birth defects and terrible things from the uranium tailings that are laying around on their land. It's mostly on indigenous lands, the uranium mining, to the polluted aftermath from processing uranium ore into fuel for what must be the most expensive method ever derived for boiling water to make electricity, to the vast tons of irradiated waste despoiling our planet in every community, leaching their poisons into the air, water, and soil. And added to all this is perhaps the most terrifying consequences produced by nuclear power, because every nuclear reactor is a bomb factory producing the deadly material needed to make nuclear weapons. That is how all the current nuclear weapon states develop their bombs. And that is how the nuclear wannabes, like Iran and Japan, keep their options open by mastering the technology to manufacture nuclear weapons material. Meanwhile, more than 30 countries eager to join the Old Boys Advanced Technology Club are now trying to acquire nuclear power, including the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Turkey, Guinea, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. And that's because they learned that if they had a nuclear bomb or a capacity, we'd leave them alone like we're leaving North Korea alone. And when they don't have it, you know, we're threatening them. Once they got the bomb, they got their deterrent. There are now 440 peaceful reactors in 31 countries, all producing deadly bomb materials, with 272 research reactors in 56 countries, some producing highly enriched uranium, which is bomb level. The signers of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty that finally ended nuclear testing were well aware that having a nuclear reactor, a nation had been given the keys to the bomb factory, because in order for that treaty to go into force, every country with a nuclear reactor has to sign it. In other words, there won't be a recognized treaty until everybody signs on, and we're not signing on, let alone others. George Tenet, the former CIA director, said, "The difference between producing low-enriched uranium and weapons-capable high-enriched uranium is only a matter of time and intent, not technology." And I want to get to the good news. I could go on and on about that, but you get the picture. The good news, well, I do want to say that the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, like our Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is totally dominated by the industry. And I was at the UN meeting where they reported on the deaths at Chernobyl, where they said 50 people died. And there was like a gasp from the whole audience. And they have a collusive agreement with the World Health Organization that the World Health Organization can't do any studies about radiation without first vetting it with the IAEA, and then, you know, making sure, and they have all kinds of statements even about food irradiation. We don't want to upset the people, you know, there's all kinds of PR to protect the industry. And now there's a Fukushima cover. Oh, and I do want to say that Alexei Yablokov, who is a Russian scientist that published his results with the New York Academy of Science that you said is controversial, but they collected all the Ukrainian and Russian studies after Chernobyl on the ground. I don't think it's controversial. And they found 1 million deaths from Chernobyl.